Hi, my name is Shelley Cheney. I'm not afraid of death, I just don't want to be there when it happens. A quote by Woody Allen. Imagine this is how a lot of people feel, but death is inevitable throughout everyone's lives. You will encounter it at many aspects. You will experience your own death, a family member's death, a friend's, a pet's, and so on. Anything that lives will eventually meet death. Our current life expectancy is about 79 years old. It used to be about 47. The change in life expectancy is mainly due to the change in the most common causes of death. The short life expectancy used to be largely due to acute infectious diseases, while today most deaths are the result of chronic illness such as human heart disease, cancer, and many more. According to Dee Spelder, whether routine or extraordinary, our encounters with death in the news media influence the way we think about and respond to death. I believe this is true for all media sources. Sometimes the media can cause re-victimization to the victim and or their family. It can sometimes become hard to tell the difference between a public event and a personal loss. The language we use when talking about death is often subtle and vague. Death language is often made up of euphemisms, metaphors, and slang to avoid the harsh realities. Therefore, the reality is devalued and depersonalized. However, when we use this subtle and vague death language for spiritual transition, it is perceived differently. Language can be an extremely powerful tool and influence our thoughts. It can also reflect different variations of attitudes toward death and dying. Linked with language is humor. Humor can ease our anxiety about death, and it comes in all forms. Humor can also make it easier to deal with. There are 3 ways humor functions with regards to death. These 3 ways are the following. Makes it easier to talk about by raising our consciousness about a taboo topic, provides an escape from pain and allows a sense of control, and is a great leveler. In comparison, humor is also very helpful to those who are seriously ill. On that same token, though, it is used by emergency personnel and other professionals who deal with death. The understanding of death changes throughout life. There are 2 major theories by Erikson and Piaget that help to explain how the understanding of death changes over the lifespan. I am going to focus on Erikson's theory. Let's first take a look at infancy and toddlerhood. Erikson's stage for infancy is from birth to roughly 1 year. This is when the child develops trust or mistrust. The death of a caregiver can disrupt their ability to trust others and their environment. Erikson's stage of toddlerhood is from 1 year to 3 years and deals with autonomy versus shame and doubt. A death of a caregiver can affect them gaining independence and can cause a regression in their behaviors, such as clinginess and crying. Early childhood is from 3 to 6 years of age and involves initiative versus guilt. Death may be first acknowledged in the preschool years. For them, being dead is an altered state of living. They may think that death can be avoided by healthy lifestyles and avoiding fatal situations. They may feel guilty for having thoughts such as wishing their parents were dead. Their understanding may grow rapidly through preschool and kindergarten years. Middle childhood and school-age children are ages 6 to the beginning of puberty. They deal with industry versus inferiority. Children in this age range need detailed and concrete information in order to feel a sense of control. The death of a parent in this stage could deprive a kid of recognition. Reactions to death can include school and learning problems, phobias, anger, and hypochondria. Adolescence is from 11 to the early 20s and deals with identity versus confusion. Death threatens their success with their goals and dreams. Emerging adulthood is from about 18 to 25 and is often a time when they think they are beyond death. Early adulthood is from 19 to 40 years old and is concerned with intimacy versus isolation. According to Dee Spelder, because mature love takes the risk of commitment, the death of a loved one may be the most devastating during this stage and the next. Middle adulthood is from 40 to 60 or 65 and deals with generativity versus stagnation and self-absorption. People in this stage may begin to fear death because this is the time when their parents typically die. Later adulthood deals with integrity versus despair. This is when people accept that this is the only life they have and they cannot go back. Not only does the understanding of death change with age, it also changes based on different cultures as well. They may have a completely different understanding of death altogether. For example, when I did my cultural presentation on Eskimos, if the individual loses the ability to provide for its tribe, then they have no meaning to live on. The elders accept this fact. Their spiritual understanding of death can be much different of that of other cultures. They may have different ways of burial and after-death recognition. For example, the Eskimos had certain rules for burial, such as facing a certain direction, when buried, had to be wrapped in a certain cloth, and so on. The Eskimos believed you should only visit them for 1 year, regardless of what a culture's belief system is. It does not make them wrong or any less correct. Everyone has a different perspective of death. Another touchy topic when it comes to death is whether you would want to know if you are suffering from a life-threatening illness or not. Majority of people acknowledge that they would want to know. However, the more important issue with this is when to tell them and how much information should be disclosed. To answer this, someone must look at the patient's personality, emotions, and their ability to deal with stress. If the patient is told too many details, it may cause regression in their ability to cope. Some cultures may completely hide it from the patient. The way in which the illness is communicated to the patient can be extremely influential. It can influence the person's attitude, response to treatment, and their ability to cope. The best plan may be to at first disclose basic information until the patient asks for more, and then also think about the breaking the news as a process. Now we will take a look at how people respond to and cope with life-threatening illness. Just like initial communication of the illness, coping with the illness is also a process. Someone who is religious may find this to be helpful when learning to cope with their illness. There are 4 different types of awareness of death. Closed awareness is when the person is not aware that they are dying, but others may know. Suspected awareness is when the person suspects they are dying, but it has not been confirmed by others who do know. Mutual pretense awareness is when everyone avoids the direct communication about the patient's condition. Open awareness is when it is well known and discussed among the patient and their peers. Open awareness is not necessarily the best awareness for accepting the death, but it can allow everyone to share support that isn't available with other types of awareness. During the process of the illness, everyone can bounce back and forth between denial and acceptance. Everyone copes differently, so we cannot rely on one definite way for coping with a life-threatening illness. One model for coping suggests that you should confront the problem and revise the plan if necessary. Using open communication and using the help that is offered and maintaining a sense of hope or optimism. There are many responses that can occur. Aside with the idea of life-threatening illnesses comes the thought of an end-of-life issue and decisions. Most people want to make sure their wishes are carried out, not those of their family when they cannot speak for themselves. Advance directives can give a person a peace of mind when it comes to this. According to D. Felder, an advance directive in any state is any statement made by a competent person about choices for medical treatment should he or she become unable to make such decisions or communicate them at some point in the future. An advance directive has to be followed regardless of anything, unless under the care of EMTs. The only time doctors and other medical staff cannot follow it is if they do not know about it or the information is too vague to give them direction. After someone dies, the survivors are left with the responsibility to make after-death arrangements. As I saw in our funeral arrangement project, this can be very time-consuming and expensive for the family. You must announce the person's death, find a funeral home, arrange for the deceased to either be embalmed or cremated, select the type of services you want, decide on a headstone and cemetery, and come up with the money to cover the expenses of all these things. It is helpful to know what the person would want. if you were not directly told what they want, you should go based on what you would think they would want based on their personality. Aside from making after-death arrangements, survivors are in the process of grieving the loss of the deceased. The theory I liked the most when dealing with this grief was the model of working through grief. You first need to know that grief is an adaptive response to loss. The reality of the loss must then be confronted and accepted. You must also know that grieving is a process that occurs over time. The course of grief can be difficult for some people, while overlapping, varying, occur in different orders, and phases may reappear and disappear at random. Within the first hours or days of death, you may feel shocked and or numb. There might even be an expression of denial in this phase. The middle phase of grief deals with anxiety. In this phase, they realize it is final. They must feel despair and experience volatile emotions such as rage and resentment. The predominant emotion is sadness, along with the longing and loneliness as various needs and dependencies that were met by the deceased become aware. Oftentimes, after the funeral is over, the bereaved feel alone in their grieving. Offering them support allows them to talk about the loss and express grief. The last phase is recognized by the sense of resolution, recovery, reintegration, and transformation. This is when the grief begins to no longer take up every hour of the day. There should not be a certain time limit on grieving. Things that can make grief more difficult include sudden or unexpected death, death from an overly lengthy illness, death of a child, the bereaved perception that the death was somehow preventable, the relationship between the deceased and bereaved was angry or dependent, the bereaved's prior mental health problems or accommodated losses and stresses, and bereaved's perceived lack of social support. The information I learned throughout this class has helped me with a recent loss in the family, as well as will help me in my career as an occupational therapist. I use the skills mentioned throughout the course to help myself and my family members mourn the loss of our family member. As far as my future career, I will be dealing with people on a daily basis. Since death is inevitable, I will come across someone who is struggling with death of someone close to them. I can use the information I learned to help them with this time of grief. The people I will be assisting will also be trying to learn how to redo things in their lives they no longer know how to do due to mental or physical restrictions. They may also be learning to deal with things in an effective manner. If they are grieving, this can affect their learning process, so it would be beneficial for me to help them with their grief. No matter what you do, no one can avoid a death, whether it's their own or someone else's. I suppose if you lived in a little box all by yourself and never socialized with anybody or a living thing, then you would have to deal with your own death. However, this is very unlikely. Therefore, the media, language, and humor can all be influential to how we respond to death. Our understanding of death is always changing and continuous throughout our lifetime. We must also recognize that the understanding of death also changes depending on various cultures. Letting someone know they are terminally ill becomes unique to each individual. Some will want to know more than others, and it is a process that must be gone through. Everyone deals with this information differently, and there are 4 different types of awareness that we discussed. Everyone copes differently, and there is not a certain way to do so. When you are diagnosed with a terminal illness or before, it is important to think about what your wishes are for continued treatment in case there comes a time where you can no longer verbalize your wishes. You can express these wishes through an advance directive. When someone dies, we take on the responsibility of making an after-death arrangements. During this time and after, we will continue to mourn. There is not one right way to do so or a certain time frame in which you should do so. Thank you for listening to my speech.